The sun was shining brightly that afternoon, and the neighborhood looked calm and quiet. Everything seemed normal, just like any other day. But for John, today was about to turn into something he would never forget. He had just finished his morning errands and was walking back to his car, a sleek, shiny Porsche parked right in front of his house. He loved this car. It wasn't just a car, it was a symbol of his hard work, his dedication, and every little sacrifice he had made over the years. Today, he was looking forward to driving to his favorite coffee shop, enjoying some peace before heading home. As John walked closer to the car, he noticed something unusual. At first, he thought it was just a shadow, or maybe his imagination playing tricks on him. But then he saw it clearly. His heart stopped for a moment. The window of his Porsche was shattered. Tiny pieces of glass were scattered on the ground, glittering under the sunlight. His first thought was disbelief. He froze for a moment, staring at the mess. "No, this can't be happening," he muttered to himself. Just as he was trying to understand what had happened, he saw a boy a few steps away. The boy looked young, maybe in his early teens, with a smirk on his face. He was holding something in his hand, and it was clear now he had thrown something to break the window. John's blood ran cold. He recognized him immediately. This was Karen's son. He had seen him around the neighborhood a few times, always acting a little too confident, always wanting to show off. But John never thought he would do something like this. Not here. Not to him. John took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. He didn't want to overreact, but he couldn't hide his anger. Why would he do this, he asked himself, looking at the boy. The boy just shrugged, clearly thinking it was funny. He didn't seem scared at all. In fact, his smirk grew wider as if he wanted John to notice him. John's eyes narrowed. He knew he had to act, but he also knew this could escalate quickly. Just then, footsteps approached. Karen appeared, running toward her son, her face full of shock and panic. She looked at the broken window and then at John. "Oh my God! What happened?" she exclaimed. Her voice was loud, but there was a hint of nervousness. John didn't answer immediately. He was still trying to process the scene. "Your son, he broke my car," John said slowly, trying to keep his voice calm but firm. Karen's eyes widened even more. She looked at her son, then back at John, as if she couldn't believe what she was seeing. The tension was thick in the air. Neighbors started to peek out from their houses, curious about the commotion. John could feel the adrenaline pumping through his veins. He had to decide what to do next. Should he confront the boy? Should he call the police? The questions raced through his mind, each one louder than the last. He knew one thing for sure, he couldn't just ignore this. Not only was his car damaged, but this was also a matter of principle. Someone had to take responsibility. Karen stepped closer, trying to calm the situation. "I'm so sorry, John. I don't know why he did that," she said, her voice shaky. But John could see the hesitation in her eyes. It didn't feel like she was fully taking control of the situation. And the boy? He was still smirking, clearly not understanding the seriousness of what he had done. John felt a wave of frustration. How could someone be so careless? So reckless? So proud of breaking something that wasn't theirs? John bent down to look at the damage more closely. The window was completely shattered. The interior of the car had some glass pieces too, but luckily nothing else seemed damaged. Still, the thought of repairs, the thought of dealing with insurance, and the thought of the audacity of this act made John's stomach churn. He had never dealt with something like this before. In his entire life, he had respected his neighbors, he had respected people's property, and he had never imagined someone would act this way in front of everyone. As he stood up, John realized the story wasn't over yet. This was only the beginning. He could feel it in his gut. The way Karen and her son were looking at him, the way the boy seemed proud of what he had done, it all hinted that there would be more drama. And John was determined to see this through. He wasn't going to let this slide. Not today. Not ever. He took a deep breath, trying to stay calm but alert. He could see the curiosity in the neighbors' eyes, the whispers, and the hidden cameras on some phones. People loved drama, but John wasn't interested in entertaining them. He was interested in justice, in fairness, in making sure that actions had consequences. Then, in a quiet but firm voice, John said, "We need to call the police." Karen's eyes widened even more. Her son looked nervous for the first time. And in that moment, the atmosphere changed completely. What had started as a simple act of showing off had turned into something much bigger. And John knew, deep down, that everyone watching the scene unfold would be talking about it for a long time. As John reached for his phone, the camera-like gaze of the neighbors made him feel the weight of the moment. This wasn't just about a broken car window anymore. It was about respect, responsibility, and the shocking realization that some people think they can do anything without facing the consequences. John looked at Karen one last time, her face full of shock and worry. And in that instant, he knew one thing for certain: the day was far from over, and the story was just beginning. The neighborhood, usually quiet and peaceful, suddenly felt different. The birds weren't chirping as loudly, and the usual hum of traffic seemed distant. It was as if the world itself was holding its breath. John could feel it. Every neighbor stepping out, whispering, and peeking over fences only added to the weight of the moment. What had started as a casual walk to his Porsche had now turned into a full-blown neighborhood spectacle. Karen's son, standing a few feet away, was no longer smirking. For the first time, he seemed unsure, his earlier confidence shaken, but only slightly. He shifted from one foot to another, glancing at his mother, then back at John. John noticed every movement. Every twitch, every nervous glance, it was all telling him a story without words. He could read the tension like an open book. John took a deep breath. He knew he had to stay calm, but his mind was racing. He replayed the scene in his head, the loud crash, the glass shattering, the boy's careless smile. And yet, beneath the anger, there was another feeling, something colder, sharper. Curiosity. He wanted to know why. Why would a kid risk so much, break a luxury car, and just enjoy the chaos he created? Meanwhile, Karen was pacing back and forth, trying to regain control. "I swear, I don't know why he did this," she repeated, over and over. Her voice was high-pitched, panicked, almost desperate. But John could see through it. There was a tension there, a sense of embarrassment that went deeper than the broken Porsche. She wasn't just worried about the car. She was worried about what the neighbors would think, what the police would think, and, maybe, just maybe, she was worried about her son facing the consequences. As the moments ticked by, John's gaze wandered across the neighborhood. Neighbors were starting to gather quietly, whispering to each other. Phones were out, some recording, some just snapping photos. The feeling of being watched added an invisible pressure. John could feel it in his chest, a mix of anger, disbelief, and an odd sense of anticipation. Something told him this wasn't going to be a simple apology or a quick fix. He looked back at Karen's son. The boy fidgeted, his earlier bravado fading with every second. He toyed with his jacket, kicked at a small stone, then finally muttered something under his breath, almost inaudible. John caught it anyway. "I just wanted to show off." The words, so casual, so reckless, made John's blood boil. Show off? He just destroyed someone else's property, risked trouble with the law, and for what? To impress a few friends? To feel a moment of power? John shook his head slowly. He knew he had to act. But he also knew that rushing in, reacting purely on anger, could make things worse. He needed control. He needed to think. And above all, he needed the story to unfold in a way that left no room for denial or excuses. Then came the silence. A strange, heavy silence that blanketed the street. Even the boy seemed frozen now, as if sensing that the moment was bigger than him. The broken glass glimmered in the sun like tiny shards of truth that could not be ignored, hidden, or explained away with a shrug. John's mind wandered briefly. He thought about his Porsche, about the hours and months of work that had gone into earning it. But more than that, he thought about the principle. About teaching responsibility. About showing that actions, no matter how small or impulsive, always have consequences. That principle burned brighter than anger, guiding every decision he was about to make. Karen, sensing his shift in demeanor, took a step closer. "John, maybe we can just talk this out?" she asked, her voice a little quieter now, almost pleading. John looked at her, then at her son. He could feel the moment reaching a tipping point. Everyone around them was holding their breath. Everyone could feel that the next move would decide how this story ended. And that's when John knew. The police would have to be involved. Not out of spite. Not out of revenge. But because this situation had already gone beyond a simple mistake. Someone needed to be accountable. And in that moment, as the boy's eyes darted nervously and Karen wrung her hands in panic, John realized the story was no longer just about a broken window. It was about consequences. About respect. And about a lesson that, once learned, would not be forgotten. With a steady hand, John reached for his phone. He could feel every pair of eyes on him. The street seemed smaller now, crowded with whispers, glances, and silent judgment. Every second of hesitation would make this moment bigger, more dramatic, and more unforgettable. And John wanted it to be unforgettable for everyone involved. He took a deep breath, raised his phone, and prepared to dial. The calm before the storm had ended. The story was about to explode into something none of them would ever forget. The air felt electric as John stepped closer to the shattered Porsche. Every step he took seemed louder than it should be, echoing against the quiet street. The broken glass crunched under his shoes, and with every crunch, a wave of anger and disbelief surged through him. Karen's son, standing just a few feet away, shifted uncomfortably, though he tried to hide it. The boy's earlier arrogance had cracked, but only slightly. His eyes darted between John and the glimmering shards, unsure of what would happen next. John stopped a few feet away, locking eyes with the boy. "Do you know what you've done?" he asked calmly, but his voice carried a sharp edge. There was no yelling yet, but the tension was thick, like fog settling over the street. The boy looked away, pretending to check something on the ground, but John knew he was watching him carefully. I didn't mean," the boy started, his voice shaky, betraying the cool attitude he had tried to keep. "You didn't mean?" John interrupted, taking a slow, deliberate step closer. "You smashed my Porsche window, just to show off?" His words hung in the air, each one heavier than the last. The boy swallowed hard, his throat dry. He tried to respond, but no words came out. Karen stepped forward, her hands raised like she was trying to protect her son from a storm that was already coming. "John, please, he didn't think." John's gaze shifted to her, then back to the boy. "This isn't just about thinking. This is about actions and consequences. And right now, there are consequences waiting." His tone was steady, but the simmering anger under the calm voice made the air almost crackle. The boy finally looked up. His face showed a mixture of fear and defiance. I just wanted to impress my friends," he admitted, barely audible. "I didn't mean to." John's jaw tightened. "Impressing your friends? By destroying someone else's property? By risking trouble with the police? That's your idea of fun?" The words were simple, but they hit harder than 1,000 lectures. Every neighbor watching could feel the tension building. For a moment, the boy looked like he might bolt, run away from the situation entirely. But something in John's gaze, firm, unwavering, kept him rooted in place. He could feel the weight of responsibility pressing down, heavier than the anger he had felt moments before. Karen's panic grew. "Please, maybe we can fix it without calling anyone," she pleaded, glancing nervously at the small crowd gathering. But John shook his head slowly. "This isn't just about fixing a window. This is about showing that actions have consequences. And if someone doesn't understand that now, they might never learn." The boy's bravado completely crumbled now. He dropped his gaze, fidgeting with his hands. The earlier smirk, the false confidence, it was all gone. For the first time, he truly understood that his actions had real results, that his desire to show off had hurt someone else and could not be ignored. John stepped even closer, lowering his voice so only the boy could hear. "Look at this. Look at what you've done. Do you understand now?" The boy nodded slowly, unable to speak. John's calm, controlled anger was more powerful than yelling ever could have been. It was the kind of presence that makes people stop, think, and finally feel the weight of their choices. Karen's hands trembled as she glanced between her son and John. She could see the lesson being carved into her son's understanding right before her eyes. And yet, she was scared of what the next step would bring. John finally took a step back inside. "We need to involve the police," he said simply. "Not because I want to punish you, but because this situation has gone beyond words. You need to learn that breaking someone else's property isn't a game." The boy's eyes widened, panic mixing with the shame on his face. Karen's hands flew to her mouth. The neighbors, sensing the climax of the drama, held their breath. Every whisper, every camera flash, every tense glance made the confrontation feel larger than life. For John, it was clear. The confrontation was over. The lesson was about to begin. And as he reached for his phone to call the authorities, he could see the fear, the regret, and the reality settling into the boy's expression. This wasn't just a Porsche window. This was a moment that would shape a young boy's understanding of responsibility, and he would never forget it. Karen's face was a mixture of shock, panic, and disbelief. One moment, she had been watching from the porch, confident that her son's little act of showing off wouldn't cause a real problem. The next, she was staring at her son, frozen, as John's calm but firm words hit the air like thunder. She could feel the eyes of the entire street on her, the neighbors whispering, some stepping closer, phones raised, capturing every moment. Her son fidgeted nervously beside her, eyes wide, guilt finally piercing through his earlier bravado. Karen's first instinct was to protect him. "John, it's just a window. It's not that serious. Maybe we can just fix it ourselves," she said, her voice trembling. But even as the words left her mouth, she knew they carried no weight. John's expression didn't waver. He was calm, controlled, and unyielding. Karen felt a knot tighten in her stomach. She glanced at her son, hoping for a spark of understanding, but all she saw was fear mixed with shame. He had finally realized the seriousness of what he had done, and Karen felt a pang of guilt herself. How had she let this go too far? How had she failed to guide him before it reached this point? The tension was almost unbearable. Every second felt stretched, as if time itself had slowed down. Neighbors watched quietly now, sensing that something important was unfolding, something bigger than a broken Porsche window. Karen could feel the judgment in their eyes, the silent commentary, and it made her chest tighten. She wasn't just embarrassed, she felt exposed, caught between defending her child and acknowledging reality. Her hands trembled as she looked at John. "Please, maybe we can just handle this quietly. I'll pay for the window." "My son, he didn't mean," her voice faltered. The words felt hollow, even to her. John shook his head slowly. "It's not just about paying for the window, Karen. This is about learning responsibility. About understanding that actions have consequences. Your son needs to see that." Karen's mind raced. She wanted to argue, to find an excuse, to blame someone else. But deep down, she knew John was right. She looked at her son again. He was standing there, trembling, fully aware of the gravity of the situation. And in that moment, Karen felt something shift inside her, a mix of fear, realization, and a painful awareness that she couldn't shield him from the truth anymore. Maybe you're right," she whispered, almost to herself. Her voice was soft, filled with an unfamiliar humility. I've been too lenient. I thought I was helping him grow, but I see now that I was wrong." Her eyes filled with tears, and she finally looked directly at John. I understand. He needs to face the consequences." For the first time, the air felt heavier, not with anger, but with the weight of reality. Karen's son, hearing this, seemed smaller somehow. The smirk, the arrogance, the careless energy, all gone. He looked at his mother, searching for support, but finding only the quiet acceptance of a lesson being learned. Karen took a shaky breath and ran her hands through her hair. "I never thought it would get this far," she said, voice breaking. "I always thought I could manage it, keep him in line, but maybe I was wrong. Maybe he needs to learn the hard way." John watched quietly, allowing her realization to settle. He didn't need to lecture her, her own words carried the weight of the moment. The lesson wasn't just for the boy, it was for her too. Actions have consequences, and sometimes, even parents have to step back and let reality do its work. The neighbors, sensing the shift, slowly began to step back, giving space but still watching intently. Phones lowered slightly, whispers dying down. The storm of tension hadn't ended, but the direction had changed. Now, it wasn't just about conflict, it was about learning, accountability, and the painful clarity that comes with mistakes. Karen finally exhaled deeply, a small but significant surrender. We'll do whatever it takes, she said. Her son looked at her, eyes wide, and finally nodded. John felt the shift too. The confrontation had ended, but the real lesson, the true consequences, were just beginning. And as he dialed the police, Karen's face reflected a complex mix of relief, fear, and resignation. She knew that this day, this moment, would leave a mark not just on her son, but on her as a parent. And somewhere deep inside, she understood that life sometimes teaches lessons no parent can give, no matter how careful or protective they try to be. The street remained quiet now, charged with anticipation. Everyone could sense that something bigger was coming. The confrontation was over, yes, but the real story was about to reach its climax. And Karen, for all her shock and panic, knew she couldn't turn back. The street felt smaller now, crowded with unspoken tension. Every neighbor who had been whispering earlier had stepped back, but their eyes remained fixed on the unfolding drama. John's hand hovered over his phone, every muscle in his body tense, every breath measured. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him, a mix of anger, responsibility, and the thrill of seeing justice finally come into play. Karen's son fidgeted beside her, his earlier bravado completely gone. His hands trembled slightly, and he avoided eye contact, glancing at the broken glass as if it were a reflection of his own guilt. "Mom, what's going to happen?" he whispered, barely audible. Karen's own fear reflected in her eyes. We'll deal with it," she said, trying to sound calm but failing. John finally dialed the number. The click of the call connecting sounded unnaturally loud in the quiet street. Everyone froze, the tension thickening like fog. He spoke clearly, calmly, but his words carried the weight of authority. "Hello, yes, I need to report vandalism. My car was just damaged, intentionally." Karen's face paled further. The reality was sinking in. She had hoped, just hoped, that John would let it slide, that a few words or money could erase what had happened. But now, the law was involved. And she knew, deep down, that there was no turning back. Her son's hands went to his face, covering it for a moment. He couldn't hide the fear, the sudden realization that his act of showing off had consequences far bigger than he had imagined. I didn't think it would go this far," he muttered. John's eyes never left the boy. "Actions have consequences," he said quietly but firmly. The words weren't meant to scare, they were meant to make him see the truth. The boy's shoulders slumped, and for the first time, the street saw the full weight of accountability in his posture. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. Every sound, the distant barking of a dog, the soft rustle of leaves in the breeze, even the quiet footsteps of neighbors shifting, seemed amplified. John could feel the collective heartbeat of the street sinking with the suspense, everyone waiting for the moment when the authorities would arrive. Karen's attempts to speak faltered repeatedly. Maybe they won't come so quickly," she whispered, almost to herself. But deep down, she knew that was wishful thinking. The call had been made, the line of responsibility had been crossed, and now she and her son had to face the consequences. The boy glanced at his mother, panic and shame mixing in his wide eyes. "Mom. I'm scared," he admitted. Karen's heart tightened, a mix of guilt and fear gripping her chest. She wanted to comfort him, to shield him from the reality they both now faced. But she also knew that shielding him would undo the lesson he desperately needed to learn. John glanced around, noticing the silent neighbors holding their breaths, waiting for the story to continue. He could feel the street watching him, but he ignored the spectators. The focus was on the boy, the lesson, and the moment that would stay with him forever. And then, finally, the sound that cut through the heavy silence, the distant wail of sirens. Karen's eyes widened. The neighbors murmured in unison, stepping slightly back, cameras raised again. The boy froze, his hands going to his mouth, his earlier confidence completely gone. John's expression remained calm, steady, and unflinching. The sirens grew louder, closer. The moment was almost here. The confrontation had ended, but the true reckoning, the official, undeniable consequences, were about to arrive. Karen's mind raced. She knew the storm had just begun, and there was no escaping it. John lowered his phone and exhaled slowly. "They're almost here," he said, his voice steady. The boy's knees seemed to weaken beneath him. Karen placed a hand on his shoulder, trembling, and whispered, "Face it, this is your responsibility." For the first time, the reality of his actions fully sank in. The Porsche window wasn't just broken glass anymore, it was a symbol of lessons learned the hard way. And as the first police car turned the corner, its lights flashing, the street seemed to hold its collective breath, waiting for the climax of a story that had begun with a simple act of showing off, and was now about to reach its unforgettable peak. The distant wail of sirens grew louder, vibrating through the quiet neighborhood like a warning. Every neighbor seemed to freeze, eyes fixed on the scene unfolding on the street. John stood tall, calm yet ready, his gaze locked on Karen's son. The boy's hands shook, and for the first time, fear had fully replaced his earlier smirk. He looked like a child caught in a storm he had created. Then the police car pulled up, lights flashing, casting red and blue shadows across the shattered glass of the Porsche. The engine's rumble faded as two officers stepped out, their expressions serious, professional, and unyielding. The street was silent except for the crunch of broken glass underfoot and the soft murmurs of neighbors leaning out to watch. One of the officers approached John first. "Sir, can you tell us what happened?" he asked, his voice calm but commanding. John took a deep breath and recounted the events, step by step. "I came back to my car, and the window was shattered. Karen's son admitted to breaking it, he said he did it to show off." His words were steady, deliberate, leaving no room for doubt. The officer's eyes shifted to the boy, who was now pale, his hands covering his face. "Is this true, young man?" the officer asked. The boy's voice was barely audible. "Yes. I didn't mean to. I just wanted to show off." His confession hung in the air like a heavy cloud. Karen stepped forward, her face pale, her hands trembling. "I'm so sorry," she said, her voice breaking. He didn't think," the officer cut her off gently but firmly. "Ma'am, we understand, but there are rules and responsibilities. Your son needs to learn that actions have consequences." Karen nodded, swallowing hard. She could feel the full weight of the situation pressing down on her. John watched silently as the officers spoke to the boy, guiding him, questioning him, making sure he understood the seriousness of his actions. He noticed the subtle shift, the boy's posture straightened slightly, guilt mixed with fear and understanding. This wasn't just a lecture. This was reality. The lesson he had avoided all along was finally here. The neighbors watched closely, some whispering, some shaking their heads. Cameras had captured every moment, every reaction. It was a story that would ripple through the neighborhood for weeks. But for John, the important part wasn't the attention. It was the clarity, the undeniable, unforgettable consequences of reckless behavior. One officer turned to Karen. "Ma'am, you need to make sure he understands this fully. He's fortunate that no one was hurt, but vandalism is a serious matter." Karen's lips pressed together. She looked at her son, then at John, realizing fully that protecting him from consequences would no longer be an option. Meanwhile, John took a step back, watching the police begin the paperwork. He could feel the adrenaline slowly leaving his body, replaced by a quiet satisfaction. The confrontation had ended. The lesson was beginning. Karen's son had faced the reality he had tried so hard to avoid. The boy finally met John's gaze, eyes wide and silent. In that moment, there was no smirk, no arrogance, only understanding. And in John's calm, unwavering presence, the young boy saw the truth he could no longer ignore. Actions mattered. Consequences mattered. Respect mattered. Karen exhaled deeply, a mixture of relief and lingering fear etched across her face. She had learned something too. Life didn't bend to excuses, and even the best intentions couldn't shield a child from the lessons that had to be learned firsthand. The sirens faded, leaving the neighborhood in an eerie silence. The Porsche window remained shattered, a stark reminder of the day's events. But it wasn't just a broken window anymore, it was a symbol of responsibility, accountability, and the moment a young boy finally faced reality. As the police prepared to leave, John looked at the boy one last time. "Remember this moment," he said softly. "It's not about punishment. It's about understanding. Don't waste this lesson." The boy nodded silently, his expression a mix of shame, fear, and comprehension. And as the officers drove away, leaving the flashing lights behind, the neighborhood slowly exhaled. The story had reached its climax. Chaos had turned into clarity. And everyone who witnessed it knew one thing: some lessons, no matter how harsh, could not be ignored. The neighborhood slowly returned to its usual rhythm, but something had changed. The quiet streets, once just a backdrop for ordinary life, now carried the weight of the day's events. The shattered Porsche windows still sparkled in the sunlight, each tiny shard reflecting a lesson that would not be forgotten. John stood beside his car, inspecting the damage one last time. The glass was gone, the frame scratched slightly, but the car had survived. For him, the Porsche was more than a vehicle, it was a symbol of his effort, his discipline, and the life he had built. And now, it had become a symbol of something else: accountability, responsibility, and the harsh reality that actions always have consequences. Karen's son stood a few feet away, silent, eyes downcast. The encounter with the police, the realization of the damage he had caused, and John's unwavering calm had left a mark deeper than the broken glass. This wasn't just a lesson about a car. It was a lesson about life. About respect. About understanding that every action, no matter how small or impulsive, could ripple far beyond one's intentions. Karen approached John cautiously, her hand still trembling slightly. I understand now," she said softly. Her voice carried a weight of realization. "I tried to protect him too much. I thought I was helping, but I see now that some lessons have to be learned the hard way." John nodded slowly. "It's not about blame," he said, his tone calm. "It's about learning. About understanding that every choice matters. Your son is young. He will remember this moment, and I hope he uses it to grow." The boy finally spoke, his voice low but sincere. I'm sorry, John. I didn't mean to. I just wanted to show off. I get it now, it was wrong." His words were simple, but they carried the weight of genuine understanding. John saw the change in him, not just fear or guilt, but the beginning of responsibility. Neighbors who had watched from a distance began to return to their routines, but whispers lingered in the air. Everyone had witnessed more than a broken window. They had seen a moment of accountability, a real-life lesson, and a young boy confronting the consequences of his choices. It was a story that would be talked about for months, a reminder that actions have power, and lessons often come unexpectedly. John took one last look at his Porsche, then at Karen and her son. "Remember this," he said quietly. "Not just the car, not just the police, remember how this made you feel. Let it guide you. Let it remind you to think before acting." Karen nodded, her eyes moist. "We will," she said. "We really will." The boy looked at John, a mix of respect and regret on his face. "I won't forget this," he whispered. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the street, John got into his Porsche. He started the engine, the roar echoing through the quiet neighborhood, and drove away slowly. Behind him, Karen and her son stood together, a little wiser, a little more aware of the world around them. The shattered window remained as a silent witness to the day, a day of chaos, confrontation, and clarity. But it also marked a new beginning. For the boy, for his mother, and for the neighborhood, life had shifted slightly. The lesson had been learned, the consequences faced, and the story would remain in everyone's minds long after the glass was replaced. Sometimes, John thought as he drove off, the hardest lessons are also the most unforgettable. And this was one of those lessons, etched not in anger, but in understanding, reflection, and the undeniable truth that actions always matter.